Here's the fuel tank strap and the fuel tank skid on my 4Runner. As you can tell, the strap is completely rusted out. I'm going to show you how to change these straps in this video. My skid was completely rusted, and when I tried to get this back bolt off originally, it broke right away. So you might have some difficulty with this bolt, and I'll show you what I did to fix this in a little bit. This is probably the most difficult bolt to get to. This is the passenger side front. Since this front bolt is up and kind of out of the way, it's above the drive shaft, it doesn't see the same elements as the back bolt. So mine wasn't very corroded, and it came off really easily once I got it started. I left it hanging on by a couple of threads to make taking out the other ones easier, so the skid plate wouldn't just fall off on me. Next up are these 3 bolts at the front driver's side. I had previously broken these loose, replacing the back strap before this video. These are either a 12 or 14 millimeter. Again, I left these in just a few threads to hold the skid on, so the whole thing didn't fall off and break itself to pieces. There's also this bolt in the back. It's on the driver's side for taking off the fuel skid. I didn't show removing it because my support completely rusted out, but you're gonna have to remove this bolt too. I'll show the support that rusted out in a second after the skid is shown on the ground. I used a jack stand here to help support the skid plate before I took it off. Just gave me a third hand to hold it up so it didn't fall off sideways or crooked. It doesn't weigh a lot, it's just awkward, and mine was falling apart. I had already replaced the back strap before this video was recorded. At the beginning I showed it and it was completely rusted through and my car was no longer safe to drive. So I did that one before I recorded this video, but the procedure here is the same. And when I did that one, I dropped the fuel tank skid plate with one of the straps still attached, the one in the front, and everything was fine. But regardless, you want to do something like this. I'm using a jack stand, but you probably want to use straps or something like that to secure the fuel tank to the bottom of the car. This is how my skid looked the first time I took it off, and if yours looks this bad, I want to know. This video is about the fuel tank strap install, not the skid plate. If you want a skid plate install video, let me know. Here is the second time I had the skid off, and this is what the bottom of the fuel tank looks like. Here are some of the holes where that original skid plate came off, and this is the back strap, the one that I had already replaced. You want to be really careful when taking off any of these bolts because the top of the bolt is protruding all the way through into the square tubular frame, and so the top of that bolt will corrode and rust over time. So you can initially break these bolts loose, but then they'll get really tight and the bolt will often break. At this stage, this bolt had gotten really tight, but the good thing is you can access those top holes with PB Blaster and soak those threads, and then sometimes you might have to run the bolt back into the threads and then back out again to get that PB Blaster all over the threads. This bolt ended up being not so bad, but it often goes a different route. This is what that whole strap assembly looks like. There's this one big bolt on this end, and then up here, it's a pin with a cotter pin that holds the rest of it together. The little cotter pin comes out really easily, almost too easily. It will go flying off into outer space if you let it. The big pin came out with my finger. It's the first time that anything has ever come off on my 4Runner as planned. It's off. If this rubber covering is still intact on your 4Runner, take it off, clean it up, and reuse it. You don't want that metal digging into your plastic fuel tank. For the fuel tank strap installation for the pin part, it's the exact same as the uninstallation, just do it in reverse. It might help to lubricate the large pin. Every time I remove a bolt from my 4Runner, I run a tap through the existing threaded holes so that the new bolt doesn't get damaged when it gets installed in those threaded holes, and to make it a lot easier on the installation process. To speed this process up, if your threads aren't too screwed up, you can use a drill bit and just run the tap in and run it out and save some time. I'm cleaning these threads out with brake parts cleaner. Here's the hardware I'm using, class 10.9, zinc plated. It should easily thread in. The class 10.9 hardware I got wasn't fully threaded, so I just stacked some washers up to clear the gap. Before you lower your jack or your straps or whatever you're using to hold the fuel tank up, you can straighten the straps in the recessed portion on the fuel tank. And that's what I'm doing right here. Here's the completed job with both the straps replaced and this RCI off-road skid plate. But I don't want you to get the wrong impression thinking that this was completely easy. I often hear these horror stories from other Toyota owners talking about how they had to drill out multiple bolts. I have to do this all the time. I just don't always show it. So I'll show you how I got the back bolt out and all the problems I encountered doing so. My first try was using a titanium drill bit, a small bit, and it was working, but I had to apply a ton of pressure up, and it was very difficult to hold the drill in that position that long. I came up with this idea where I could apply some pressure with the jack stand to the bottom of the drill and push it up into the hole. This was working excellently. I was all the way through the bolt. At the very end of the bolt, I was probably an inch deep. But at the very end, I pushed it too hard. I got a little overzealous. And the titanium bit broke off. And if you've ever tried to drill out titanium, it's impossible. My next attempt was using a punch. Often the nuts that are welded onto the square tubular frames of Toyotas or on these brackets, you can punch out with a punch and the nut will come flying off because they're usually just tack welded on. This one did not come off. The next most destructive method is to employ an air hammer as shown. Boom, that worked. I am far from a welding genius, but I thought that welds were supposed to be stronger or as strong as the native metal. I don't know what I'm missing here. The problem is the weld broke. The much larger problem is that the fuel tank is right next to where I have to weld. So I wrapped the fuel tank in my welding jacket and isolated the area with that piece of wood, and I tack welded the original weld. I checked exhaustively that there were no fuel leaks. I had a fire extinguisher right next to me, but still, this is really dangerous and it was really stupid, and you should never, ever do this. But if you do, you might as well make it pretty.